Forward by David Cheruby. Initiation is the preparation for immortality. Man is potentially immortal. Immortality is acquired when the purely human part of him becomes allied to that spiritual essence which was never created, was never born, and shall never die. It is to effect this spiritual bond with the highest that the Golden Dawn owes all its rituals and practical magical work. Isreal Regardie. It is with great honor and joy that I am writing a foreword to one of the most important and influential books of all time in the field of the magic art. This book, The Complete Golden Dawn System of Magic, is one of the greatest contributions to the great work in published form, a priceless gem of occult knowledge for students, neophytes, and adepts of the magic art. Before Isreal Regardie passed away into the infinite, he asked his close friend and student, the late Christopher S. Hyatt, to carry on and preserve his invaluable work. To this end, Dr. Hyatt devoted so much of his time and energy, selflessly and profusely, as witnessed by myself and others. Besides carrying on the torch of Isreal Regardie through the continuation of the Golden Dawn and the establishment of the Isreal Regardie Foundation, Dr. Hyatt also published some of Regardie's most important works, including this book, The Complete Golden Dawn System of Magic, which is unquestionably Isreal Regardie's magnum opus. The first edition of this book was published in 1984 by Falcon Press, New Falcon Publications, in association with Isreal Regardie Foundation. Dr. Hyatt not only published this book, but he also helped Regardie edit it, a most arduous task in and of itself. The material in this book is an improved version of the influential and inspiring material that was contained in Regardie's original 4-volume Golden Dawn set that revolutionized the occult world. This new edition of the book, published almost 30 years after the original, is the first edition to be published in paperback form, making it accessible to a larger audience of readers by a major reduction in cost. This is a significant spiritual service. A paperback edition of this book should prove to be a major contribution to the preservation and perpetuation of the magical teachings and work of the Golden Dawn and Isreal Regardie. This paperback edition of the book contains 5 magical rituals by Isreal Regardie from the archives of the Isreal Regardie Foundation. These inspired and efficacious rituals based on Golden Dawn magical techniques have never been published before in book form. They are called the pentagram rituals of air, fire, water, earth, and spirit. This paperback edition of the book also contains 2 articles, The Reawakening of Osiris, Reclaiming the God of Reintegration in the Golden Dawn System, and Consecration of a Lunar Talisman, by 2 highly respected modern-day adepts of the Golden Dawn, Chick and Tabitha Cicero, who have devoted so much time, energy, and love to the continuation of the Golden Dawn and the works of Isreal Regardie. This edition of the book also contains 2 previous articles by 2 other Golden Dawn adepts and friends of mine, Lon Milo Duquette and the late S. Jason Black, David P. Wilson, both of whom I first encountered in Los Angeles on separate occasions in 1985 at Baphomet Lodge, OTO, in Los Angeles. Wilson had an OTO initiation and Duquette an OTO Gnostic Mass, and both of whom, like myself, worked so closely with the late Dr. Hyatt, who, besides being an adept of the Golden Dawn, was also a 9th degree member of the OTO, as was Regardie. This edition of the book also contained another previous article by Dr. Jack Willis, who was Regardie's personal student. Now, Isreal Regardie, November 17, 1907 to March 10, 1985, met with the Golden Dawn magician Aleister Crowley, October 12, 1875 to December 1st, 1947, in Paris, France, on October 12, 1928, to become his personal secretary and student. He also became Crowley's confidential agent and ninth-degree member of Crowley's OTO. On October 28, 1930, Regardie took the oath of a probation on Crowley's Order of the AA, Isreal Regardie. The Order of the AA was Crowley's reformulated and advanced version of the system of the Golden Dawn. He even maintained the name of the Golden Dawn, Order for the Outer Order. Then in January of 1933, shortly after severing with Crowley, Regardie, like his magical mentor, joined the Golden Dawn, or more appropriately, an offshoot of the order called the Stella Matutina, at Hermes Temple in Bristol, with the neophyte martyr, Frater ad Majorem Adonai Gloriam. In the book, The Eye in the Triangle, New Falcon Publications, Regardie states that he retained the same neophyte motto for his 5/6 adept degree, the Adeptus Minor grade. Regardie resigned as an adept from Hermes Temple of the Stella Matutina on December 5th, 1934. Many years later, Isreal Regardie and Christopher S. Hyatt joined forces in the great work. Dr. Hyatt personally trained under Regardie, and he inevitably became Regardie's magical heir, continuing the Regardie lineage of the Golden Dawn in association with the Isreal Regardie Foundation, which was originally established by Dr. Hyatt to carry on Regardie's name and work. Dr. Hyatt was also one of the founders of the Thelemic Order of the Golden Dawn. Dr. Hyatt passed away into the infinite on February 9, 2008. Almost 3 years later, I determined to revive the Isreal Regardie Foundation. When I was asked by New Falcon Publications to write a foreword for this new edition of the complete Golden Dawn System of Magic, I recognized it as an important opportunity to do the great work of the Foundation, to help preserve and perpetuate the teachings of Isreal Regardie and the Golden Dawn, and to carry on an important work of Dr. Hyatt in this regard. The complete Golden Dawn System of Magic was Isreal Regardie's last book, the final token of his true will. Through this book, he bequeathed to us the means to carry on the great work of the Golden Dawn, which, in a nutshell, is initiation. By his teachings, rituals, and initiation ceremonies, the work of the Golden Dawn is to initiate and prepare us to, quote, become more than human, or in other terms, to, quote, attain the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. Such is the sublime work of the illumination or enlightenment as described in magical terms. Like Aleister Crowley's prodigious periodical called The Equinox, in which Crowley published for the first time the Golden Dawn rituals of initiation, breaking his oaths of secrecy to the Golden Dawn as did Regardie. The complete Golden Dawn System of Magic was given to the world by Isreal Regardie to preserve for us this sacred tradition, so that a new renaissance might, in due season, rekindle the hidden light. In Regardie's own inimitable words, quote, one of the things that has always rattled me is human secrecy. So long as this body of knowledge remains locked up in one or more human beings' brains, it runs the risk of being lost to mankind forever. It needs to be put in book form, to be distributed all over the world, so that if some type of cataclysm occurred, someone somewhere would be able to rediscover this material and once more make it available. So long as a few books can be found tucked away somewhere, this knowledge cannot be lost. So therefore, in writing the complete Golden Dawn System of Magic, my intention was to make it as complete as possible, hoping that Falcon Press, with new leaders at its helm, would make certain that this had the widest possible distribution. Thus, in the event that there was a major calamity and Western civilization as we know it was destroyed in the Northern Hemisphere, there would be dozens or hundreds of sets of this teaching distributed in the Southern Hemisphere. Then, this form of occult knowledge, this particular rendition of being, quote, brought to light, would endure for another 1,000 years or so. Lastly, To you, the dear reader and practitioner of the invaluable material contained in this monumental book on the magic art of the Golden Dawn, I wish to say, may you realize and accomplish the great work, and attain the quintessence, the stone of the philosophers, the summum bonum, true wisdom, and perfect happiness. David Carabin, Isreal Regardie Foundation, Los Angeles, California, USA, March 10th, 2013, EV. Introduction. History of the Golden Dawn, The Early Years by Isreal Regardie. The Order of the Golden Dawn narrates the history lecture of that order. It is a Hermetic society whose members are taught the principles of occult science and the magic of Hermes. During the early part of the second half of last century, several eminent adepti and chiefs of the order in France and England died, and their death caused a temporary dormant condition of temple work. Prominent among the adepti of our order and of public renown were Eliphas Levi, the greatest of modern French magi, Ragon, the author of several books of occult lore, Kenneth M. Mackenzie, author of the famous and learned Masonic Encyclopedia, and Frederick Hockley, possessed of the power of vision in the crystal, and whose manuscripts are highly esteemed. These and other contemporary adepti of this order received their knowledge and power from predecessors of equal and even of greater eminence. They received indeed and have handed down to us their doctrine and system of theosophy and Hermetic science and the higher alchemy from a long series of practiced investigations, whose origin is traced to the Fratres Rosicrucians of Germany, which association was founded by one Christian Rosicrucian around the year 1398 AD. The Rosicrucian revival of mysticism was but a new development of the vastly older wisdom of the Kabbalistic rabbis, and of that very ancient secret knowledge, the magic of the Egyptians, in which the Hebrew Pentateuch tells you that Moses, the founder of the Jewish system, was, quote, learned. That is, in which he had been initiated. In a slender but highly informative booklet entitled Data of the History of the Rosicrucians, published in 1916 by the late Dr. William Wynne Westcott, we find the following brief statement. In 1887, by permission of S.D.A. Anna Sprengel, a continental Rosicrucian adept, the Isis Arena Temple of Hermetic students of the Golden Dawn was formed to give instruction in the medieval occult sciences. Writers M.E.V., William Robert Woodman, with S.A., Dr. Wynne Westcott, and S.R.M.D., S.L. McGregor Mathers, became the chiefs, and the latter wrote the rituals in modern English from Old Rosicrucian MSS, the property of S.A., supplemented by his own library researches. In these two statements, is narrated the beginning of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an organization which has exerted a great influence on the development of occultism since its revival in the last quarter of the 19th century than most people can realize. There can be little or no doubt that the Golden Dawn is, or rather was until very recently, the sole depository of magical knowledge, the only occult order of any real worth that the West in our time has known, and a great many other occult organizations owe what little magical knowledge is theirs to leakages issuing from that order and from its renegade members. The membership of the Golden Dawn was recruited from every circle, and it was represented by dignified professions as well as by all the arts and science, to make but little mention of the trades and business occupations. It included physicians, psychologists, clergymen, artists, and philosophers, and normal men and women, humble and unknown, from every walk of life, who found inspiration from its font of wisdom and undoubtedly many would be happy to recognize and admit the enormous debt they owe to it. As an organization, it preferred always to shroud itself in an impenetrable cloak of mystery. Its teaching and methods of instruction were stringently guarded by various penalties attached to the most awe-inspiring obligations in order to ensure that secrecy. So well have these obligations, with but one or two exceptions, been kept, that the general public knows next to nothing about the order, its teaching, or the extent and nature of its membership. Though this book will touch upon the teaching of the Golden Dawn, concerning its membership as a whole, the writer will have nothing to say, except perhaps to repeat what may already be more or less well known. For instance, it is common knowledge that W.B. Yeats, Arthur Machen, and, if rumor may be trusted, the late Arnold Bennett were at one time among its members, together with a good many other writers and artists. With regard to the names given in Dr. Westcott's statement, it is necessary that we bestow to them some little attention in order to unravel, so far as may be possible, the almost inextricably confusion which has characterized every previous effort to detail the history of the order. MEV was the motto chosen by Dr. William Robert Wildron, an eminent Freemason of the last century. Sapere ad and non omnes morir were the two mottos used by Dr. Westcott, an antiquarian, scholar, and coroner by profession. SRMD, or S. Ringol Mahrim, was the motto of S.L. MacGregor Mathers, the translator of The Greater Key of King Solomon and the Book of Sacred Magic of Albarellam the Mage, and the Kabbalah Unveiled, which latter consisted of certain portions of the Zohar prefixed by an introduction of high erudition. He also employed the Latin motto, Dio Duce Comite Ferro, SDA, was the abbreviation of the motto, Sapiens Dom Inapater Austris, chosen by Fräulein Anna Sprengel of Nuremberg, Germany. Such were the actors on this occult stage. This, the dramatis personae, in the background of the commencement of the order, more than any other figures who may later have prominently figured in its government and work. These are the four outstanding figures publicly involved in the English foundation of what came to be known as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. How the actual beginning came to pass is not really known, or rather, because of so many conflicting stories and legends, the truth is impossible to discover. At any rate, so far as England is concerned, without a doubt, we must seek for its origins in the Societas Rosicrucianae in Anglia. This was an organization formed in 1865 by eminent Freemasons, some of them claiming Rosicrucian initiation from continental authorities. Amongst those who claimed such initiation was one Kenneth Mackenzie, a Masonic scholar and encyclopedist, who received his at the hands of a Count Appenea in Austria. The objects of this society, which confined its membership to Freemasons in good standing, was to afford mutual aid and encouragement in working out the great problems of life and in discovering the secrets of nature, to facilitate the study of the systems of philosophy founded upon the Kabbalah and the doctrines of Hermes Trismegistus. Dr. Westcott also remarks that today his fratres, quote, are concerned in the study and administration of medicines and in their manufacture upon old lines. They also teach and practice the curative effects of colored light and cultivate mental processes which are believed to induce spiritual enlightenment and extend powers of human senses, especially in the directions of clairvoyance and clairaudience, end quote. The first chief of this society, its supreme magus, so-called, was one Robert Wentworth Little, who is said to have rescued some old rituals from a certain Masonic storeroom. And it was from certain of those papers that the society's rituals were elaborated. He died in 1878, and his steed was appointed Dr. William R. Woodman. Both Dr. Westcott and MacGregor Mathers were prominent and active members of this body. In fact, the former became supreme magus once Woodman's death. Magus upon Woodman's death, the office of junior magus being confirmed upon Mathers. One legend has it that one day Westcott discovered in his library a series of cipher manuscripts, and in order to decipher them, he enlisted the aid of MacGregor Mathers. It is said that this library was that of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, and it is likewise asserted that those cipher manuscripts were among the rituals and documents originally rescued by Robert Little from Freemasons' Hall. Yet other accounts have it that Westcott found the manuscripts on a bookstall in Farringdon Street. Further apocryphal legends claim that they were found in the library of books and manuscripts inherited from the mystic and clairvoyant Frederick Hockley, who died in 1885. Whatever the real origin of these mysterious cipher manuscripts, when eventually deciphered with the aid of MacGregor Mathers, they were alleged to have contained the address of Fraulein Anna Sprengel, who purported to be a Rosicrucian adept in Nuremberg. Here was a discovery which naturally, not for one moment, was neglected. Its direct result was a lengthy correspondence with Fraulein Sprengel, culminating in the transmission of authority to Woodman, Westcott, and Mathers to formulate in England a semi-public occult organization which was to employ elaborate magical ceremonial, Kabbalistic teaching, and a comprehensive scheme of spiritual training. Its foundation was designed to include both men and women on a basis of perfect equality, in contradiction to the policy of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, which was comprised wholly of Freemasons. Thus, in 1887, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was established. Its first English temple, Isis Urania, was opened in the following year. There is a somewhat different version as to its origin, having behind it the authority of Frater Fr., the late Dr. Felkin, who was the chief of the Stella Matutina, as well as a member of the Societas Rosicrucianae. According to his account, in the following words are substantially his own. Prior to 1880, members of the Rosicrucian order on the continent selected with great care their own candidates whom they thought suitable for personal instruction. For these pupils, they were each individually responsible. The pupils then selected, being trained by them in the theoretical traditional knowledge now used in the outer order. After some 3 or more years of intensive private study, they were presented to the chiefs of the order, and if approved and passed by examination, they then received their initiation into the order of the Rosea Rubae et Aurora Crucis. The political state of Europe in those days was such that the strictest secrecy as to the activities of these people was very necessary. England, however, where many Masonic bodies and semi-private organizations were flourishing without interference, was recognized as having far greater freedom and liberty than the countries in which the continental adepts were domiciled. Some, but by no means all, suggested therefore that in England, open temple work might be inaugurated. And Dr. Felkin here adds, though without the least word of explanation as to what machinery was set in motion towards the attainment of that end. And so it was. It came about then that the temples arose in London, Bradford, Weston-super-Mare, and Edinburgh. The ceremonies we have were elaborated from cipher manuscripts, and all went well for a time. As to what ensued after the inauguration of temple work, we have little record, though an unorthodox account written by Aleister Crowley continues this historical theme in substantially the same words as were orally communicated to me by the late imperator of one of the now existent temples. After some time, SDA died. Further requests for help were met with a prompt refusal from the colleagues of SDA. It was written by one of them that SDA's schemes had always been regarded with disapproval, but since the absolute rule of the adepts is never to interfere with the judgment of any other person whomsoever, how much more than one of themselves, and that one most highly revered. They had refrained from active opposition. The adept who wrote this added that the order had already quite enough knowledge to enable it or its members to formulate a magical link with the adepts. Shortly after this, one called SRMD announced that he had formulated such a link, and that himself, with two others, was to govern the order. We content ourselves, then, with observing that the death of one of his two colleagues and the weakness of the other secured to SRMD the sole authority. In elaboration of this statement, it may be said that in 1891, Dr. Woodman died after but a few days' illness, leaving the management of the order to Westcott and Mathers. Evidently, these two scholars carried on quite well together for about 6 years. But the indications are that the order flourished and grew expansive. Exactly why Westcott withdrew from the order, where this is the next major occurrence, appears difficult to discover. Concerning this, also several versions are extant. One account has it that accidentally he left some of the order manuscripts in a portfolio, bearing his signature in a cab, and the driver, upon finding them, turned them over to the authorities. Since Westcott was by profession an East London coroner, the medical authorities strongly objected that one in an official capacity should, no matter how remotely, be connected with anything that savored occult. It was suggested to him, therefore, that he must withdraw from the order or else resign his post as coroner. Since the two were considered in those days incompatibles, he chose to resign from the order. Yet again, it is suggested that it was simply a personal quarrel that led to the parting of the ways with Mathers, which does seem the more probable explanation. Whatever the cost, some 6 years after the death of Dr. Woodman, Westcott withdrew from the order, which was thus left the sole authority of Mathers. The pamphlet on Rosicrucian history then proceeds to a narrative that following Westcott's resignation from this association in 1897, the English temples soon after fell into abeyance. This reads like an instance of wish fulfillment, though fairly near the essential truth of the matter. It is not quite in accordance with fact. Following the resignation of Westcott, Mathers reigned within his order as supreme autocrat. Judging from the evidence at our disposal, he was not a particularly benevolent one, for many were the misunderstandings that ruffled the mystic placidity of his temples, and several of the individuals who dared so much as to differ or argue with him were promptly expelled and flung into the outer darkness. Presumably, spiritual pride was the flaw in his armor, and he seemed to harbor quite a few delusions. One of the latter was his conveyance to the body of adepti as a piece of objective, everyday experience, that whilst in the Bois de Boulogne, One day he was approached by 3 adepts who confirmed him in the sole rulership of the order. On the strength of this supposed occurrence, he issued to the Theurgy of the grade of Adeptus Minor a powerfully worded manifesto, naming himself in no uncertain terms as a chosen vessel and demanding from all those who received the manifesto a signed oath of personal loyalty and allegiance. Those who refused to send a written statement of voluntary submission to him were either expelled from the order or degraded to a lower rank. Meanwhile, a considerable amount of discontent had been slowly brewing amongst the order members. Dissatisfaction with the autocratic leadership of SRMD was growing very steadily and persistently. No definite or clear-cut reasons appeared to be given for this, for evidently this restfulness had been gradually fructifying, whilst the hypertrophy of Mathers's ego was becoming more and more pronounced. Some say that SRMD was guilty of innumerable magical tricks of a particularly irresponsible nature, which eventually brought disrepute both upon himself and the order of which he was head. Others, more romantically minded, claim that his English translation of the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage was a powerful magical act which attracted to his sphere forces of evil so terrible in nature that he was wholly unable to withstand them. Frater F.R. propounds the more rational view that it was simply spiritual pride and love of power which so gained the ascendancy that he demanded of the members of his organization a personal fealty and obedience to his own personality instead of to the work itself. How very familiar all this sounds. In one form or another, it is the story of the same unhappy fate which dogs and finally ruins every religious and spiritual community. By changing these names, Theosophists may recognize a very homely story. In claiming his right to unquestioned leadership, and when refusing to appoint 2 others of the body of Adepti to fill the vacant spots of co-chiefs, Mathers also promised some of the more advanced members of the Second Order additional grades in the path of adeptship, and even more esoteric teaching. These apparently were not forthcoming, though it must be confessed that regardless of the personal shortcomings of Mathers as a leader or as a writer, it is patent that there was a vast knowledge and a deep and wide erudition concealed within him. Naturally, the Adepti gave utterance to their complete disapproval of this delay in the fulfillment of their chief's promises, gradually coming to insist that he had neither the knowledge nor the grace to impart. Further unpleasant bickering drew forth from Mathers the retort that he was certainly not going to waste either his grades or knowledge on such hopeless duffers as they were. And in any event, he was chief and leader. Their further progress, if there was to be any, must be left entirely in his hands. In short, a virulent quarrel was in process of development, and though for quite a long time it fermented beneath the surface, it finally culminated in a group of the Adepti forming a strong combination to expel their chief, SRMD, just prior to the actual appearance of the schism. And whilst yet the rebellion was gaining impetus, certain events happened which call here not for elucidation, since that is impossible, but simply for registration. About this time, a certain Miss Rose Horace approached Mathers, who came to acknowledge her as an initiate of a high grade. Exactly why, it is again impossible to say definitely. It was stated in defense of Mathers that Miss Horace was able to repeat to him a certain conversation he had had years previously when he visited Madame Blavatsky at Denmark Hill. And the repetition of this scrap of conversation convinced him of her status. Anyway, it was a sad piece of deception and an unhappy acknowledgement on the part of Mathers, indicating his complete lack of judgment and insight into character. Mrs. Horace and her husband were very soon discovered to be sex perverts of the worst description. Nor was this all, for it is alleged that they were also responsible for this theft from Mathers of a complete set of order documents. It seems incredible that Mathers could have been so gullible, for that is the only word which adequately describes his stupidity, as to accept without further verification the occult claims of this woman, giving her access to the rituals and teachings of the Golden Dawn. Subsequently, the immoral activities of these two people having attracted the attention of the police, they were arrested. In December 1901, at their trial, the Order of the Golden Dawn was given unpleasant and unjustified publicity by being associated with the checkered careers of these two persons. In the witness box, the male prisoner made the remark concerning the Golden Dawn neophyte obligation that it, quote, was prepared by the chiefs of the order who are in India, unquote, which of course was a farrago of nonsense, but unfortunately just the type of nonsense which survives for many years. He was sentenced to 15 years penal servitude and his wife to 7. Around this period also, one Florence Farr, whose esoteric motto was Sora SSDT, having for some years been left in charge of Isis ran a temple, while Mathers continued his research work in Paris, decided for various personal reasons to enter her resignation from that important post. Under date of February 16, 1900, Mathers, writing from Paris, refused to accept her resignation, believing that she intended to, quote, form a combination to make a schism within with the idea of working secretly or avowedly under separate audit. In the same letter, he was responsible for the astonishing statement that S.A. had never been at any time in touch with Fräulein Sprengel of Nuremberg, but had either himself forged or procured to be forged the professed correspondence between him and her. As was only to be expected, this letter came as an overwhelming surprise to SSDD, who was thoroughly stunned by this accusation of dishonesty and forgery leveled against S.A. After contemplating the whole situation in an almost frantic state of mind for several days in the country, she finally communicated with S.A., asking him to corroborate or deny the accusations. Her next act was to form a committee of 7 within the Second Order to investigate the allegations made. This committee asked SRMD to produce for his own sake and for the sake of the order proof of the accuracy of his statements. Because, they argued, since it was upon the authority of this alleged correspondence that the order was founded, the historical position of the order, as descended from medieval Rosicrucian sources, collapsed, should it be proven that the correspondence had been forged. This viewpoint was not altogether accurate, for while SRMD had stated that SA had never been in touch with STA, he never denied that he himself had not been in constant communication with her. Then followed a lengthy correspondence which afterwards was collected and printed in the form of a long dossier. In fine, Mathers refused unconditionally to acknowledge the authority or even existence of the committee, nor would he produce proof of any kind to substantiate his claims that SA had forged second-order communications. It goes without saying, of course, that SA fervently denied the truth of these allegations of forgery, but all the same he refused to do anything about it. No good purpose could possibly be served by enlarging upon the unhappy events which immediately followed. To a large extent, the history of the order is so confused and muddled at this juncture, and the rumors which have come down to us so chaotic and contradictory, that it is proved wholly impossible to extricate the truth from the foul debris of slander, abuse, and recrimination. A clear picture of what occurred seems impossible to recover. It would appear to state the matter simply, that Mathers expelled the rebels who then formed a schism. On the other hand, it is also held that he was himself expelled by the revolting wing from his own order and left with about half a dozen adherents, with whose assistance, moral and financial, he continued his temple. At their first magical gesture of independence, the rebels changed the name of the order to the Stella Matutina. Ruled for a year by a committee of 12, developments forced them to realize that this was far from a satisfactory arrangement, inasmuch, however, as it had taken several years first to brew and then to develop into an open gesture of defiance. The spirit which had conceived the rebellion was not thus at a single stroke to be banished. Having elevated the standard of revolt by expelling their former chief, for many a dismissal month was the Stella Matutina haunted by that ghost. After almost inconceivable pettiness and despair, the rebels were at the end persuaded by circumstances to abandon every feature of their reform, to return to the original scheme of appointing 3 chiefs to govern and lead them. Even this later was abandoned, if not officially, then in practice. For a virtual autocracy similar to that enjoyed by Mathers was once again instituted, though on a much smaller scale. The revolt had been in vain. Those finally selected and appointed as the chiefs were Fraters sub spe, Finem respice, and Sacramentum regis. These 3 fraters conducted the order of the Stella Matutina in harmony for about a year. Then, for various reasons, Sacramentum regis chose to resign. At the meetings held to appoint his successor, differences of the most trivial character continued to arise. Indeed, the spirit of fraternity and wisdom had departed, leaving its adverse antithesis, the venom of destruction, to dwell in their midst. Another split developed, apparently one wing of the schism, thoroughly alarmed in all its bourgeois incompetence and fear by the recent disturbances to the peace of the order, attributed that cycle of catastrophe to the occult content of the order teaching, and because of this were now desirous of casting aside as valueless from the spiritual point of view the whole of the magical tradition. Their intention was to retain a sort of interdeterminate mysticism of the type which has so often brought disrepute upon the subject, coming to regard their temple as an adjunct, a clandestine back door to the church in some one of its many forms, with special attractions. I believe to the Anglo-Catholic groups. One other and more important group within the schism, led by Fraters Finem Respice and sub spe, carried on full temple work, more or less adhering to the original plan of the Golden Dawn. Routine is laid down in the documents drawn up by McGregor Mathers. Thus we find a place in a consolidated fraternity at least 3 separate groupings of individuals engaged in the practice of the Golden Dawn ceremonial system in open temples, perpetuating as best they might the traditions of the magic of light. There was first the diminutive group under the leadership of SRMD, still retaining the original order name. To him were still loyal the temple or temples that a few years prior to the final crash had been instituted in the United States of America. Both FR and SS were in charge of a Stella Matutina. It is my belief that After a while, even they parted company or conducted separate groups. The one in London calling itself the Amun Temple, and the later in Edinburgh, Amun-Ra by name. In London, also a separate temple was being conducted by a Frater Sacramentum Regis, calling itself the Reconstructed Rosicrucian Order, a group characterized by its exclusive devotion to Christian mysteries, its rituals being elaborated into verbose and interminable parades of turgidity. Formerly united by a single fraternal bond, we now see several temples being conducted by different groupings of individuals who, while pretending to fraternal communion, had but little sympathy with and affection for the sister temples of the schism. The slander that was invented and swiftly circulated, as only malice can be circulated, is unrepeatable. Few individuals of real worth were exempt from this network of scandal, which enmeshed the whole organization. This man was an adulterer, then a dysomniac, and even after the lapse of more than 30 years, his slander is still current. So thoroughly had the central unity of the order broken up that each of these Thalamassutina temples appointed its own imperator, cancellarius, and premonstrator, considering itself by these Jesuits an autonomous occult body. Thus began the downfall of organized magical instruction through the semi-esoteric channels of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Whatever else could be insisted upon in magic, unity is the prime essential. A united body of manifestation at all costs should have been maintained. And an old adage, quote, united we stand, divided we fall, unquote, is no idle phrase, especially since the elimination of the heresy of separatists is one of the cardinal injunctions of the great work. The separate temples decided to fall independently of how or why or where the other groups fell. Each was smug, complacent, and fully confident that it alone continued the magical tradition. The result is that today those original temples are either dead or moribund. While they may have given rise to yet other groups, there is not one of the latter which is not in a diseased condition. One can hardly help recalling the bitter admonition given by SRMD to the organizers of the schism. He said, in effect, and in later years, Frater Susby corroborated that statement, that he was the principal chief of the order, by whom and through whom the order had originally been organized, to disseminate the magical tradition. Remember, he warned what happened to the Theosophical Society after Blavatsky had departed, and there began the disintegration of the worldwide society she had founded and fed with her own lifeblood. Certainly, Mather's prophecy seems to have vindicated itself. Just as there are innumerable sects claiming to be the original Theosophical Society and professing allegiance to the principles taught by Blavatsky, so are there now several decaying temples claiming unbroken descent from the original Isis Reina. Each insists fervently that it alone is the genuine order. All others are schismatic and unimportant. Today, as stated above, not one of these surviving temples is in an even moderately healthy condition, nor have they ever been since the early days of their foundation. An amusing sidelight on human nature is disclosed by the fact that in one of the obligations retained by the schismatic groups, there is still the original clause, quote, do you further undertake not to be a stirrer up of strife, of schism, or of opposition to the chiefs, unquote. It was towards the close of 1898, just prior to the revolt, that Aleister Crowley was introduced to the order by Frater Volo Nosquier, receiving his neophyte initiation at Mark Mason's hall. It was clear soon after he joined that here was a highly gifted young man, and that in many ways, though unrestrained and undisciplined, His was a powerfully magical personality. From Captain J.S.C. Fuller's rather verbose and flamboyant account in the Equinox, we gather that Crowley was advanced to the grades of the order quickly and assimilated the routine knowledge without the least difficulty. Those grades which were not formally separated by automatic delays were taken at the rate of one a month, and the succeeding ones at the prescribed intervals of 3, 7, and 9 months. By the time he had taken his portal grade, the revolt was in full swing, the wisdom and authority of the chief being on every side doubted and challenged. It was around this period, too, that Crowley's morals and alleged pernicious conduct offended those who were conducting temple work in London, and the ruling adepti of Isis Urania refused to advance them further. They refused to do this in spite of the deliberate warning contained in Mather's manifesto previously mentioned. Quote, "What I discountenance and will check and punish whenever I find it in the order is the attempt to criticize and interfere with the private life of members of the order. The private life of a person is a matter between himself or herself and his or her God." Unquote. Whether Mathers was impressed by the promise of Crowley's personality, or whether he decided upon his next steps to show contempt for the ruling chiefs of Isis Urania Temple, we do not know. But soon after, Crowley was invited to Paris, where he received the grade of Adeptus Minor from Mathers in Abhathor Temple. This act served but to inflame the differences which were now openly separating Mathers from his erstwhile followers, and increased the bitter hatred which the order members bore and still bear for Crowley. To Crowley's credit, it must be conceded that when open revolt did flame forth, at least he sided with SRMD, acting as his plenipotentiary in the proposed meetings with the rebels in London. The Adepti, however, unconditionally refused to recognize or have aught to do with Crowley. In his fantastic garb of a Highland chieftain with kilt, dirks and tartan, and his face concealed by a heavy mask, he did assuredly make himself so great a laughing-stock on that occasion as to make it difficult for anyone to take him seriously. The conjunction of two headstrong and egotistical personalities rendered it most problematic that sooner or later Crowley and Mathers should quarrel. They did, and each went his separate way. Many and varied again are the fantastic accounts of the reasons for that separation. But no matter what their cause, some 3 years afterwards, events led Crowley to denounce Mathers as one obsessed either by Abramelin demons or by the evil personalities of the then incarcerated Horus couple, that he himself had been nominated by the secret chiefs of the Invisible Order to be the outer head of the visible organization. In the various numbers of the Equinox, the official organ of Crowley's personal reformulation of the order system under the title of AA, which does not signify Atlantean adepts, as supposed by some stupid reviewer of the Occult Review, may be found Crowley's more or less garbled version of the order teaching and ceremonial. At this juncture, it is needful to contradict denials on the part of certain order members that Crowley did not obtain full order teaching. Some of these denials are entirely too vehement, and methinks the lady doth protest too much. First of all, I am fully convinced from a close and prolonged study of all Crowley's literary output that he did obtain his Adeptus Minor grade from Mathers after the London group refused to advance him. Unquestionably, this is true. Nevertheless, even if this were not the case, he was the intimate, so to say, of Fratres Volo Nasceri and Yehai Or, both advanced members of the grade of Adeptus Minor, who coached and trained him so that he benefited by their knowledge and wide experience. Whatever knowledge these fratres had received from the order documents was given to Crowley. There is a little, I imagine, that he did not receive of the order teaching, then extent. Whatever may have been the means, fair or foul, by which he obtained that teaching. And while he did not publish it in its entirety, it is possible to perceive from hints scattered here, there, and everywhere that very little had been kept from him. Any student who has a bird's eye view of the order system will recognize traces of every aspect of it in the different volumes of Crowley's literary fecundity. Had Crowley published the entire body of knowledge, only slightly editing the redundancy and verbose complexity of Mather's literary style, had he issued that teaching so that it bore some semblance to its original state to indicate what it really was and how practiced within the temple, his expose might not have been too serious. It is possible that he might have been acknowledged as a benefactor of mankind, even if later on he did ruin his own personal reputation by broadcasting absurd legends and leading a foolishly dissipated life. But it was his special mode of publication which argued against the advisability of partially disclosing the secret knowledge of the order. He tampered unnecessarily with the grade rituals, so that their beauty as well as practical worth was gone. It became impossible to form any estimation of the efficiency or construction of those ceremonies from their mutilated shadows in the equinox. Perhaps his aim was to eliminate important parts of the rites and practical work so that interested people, realizing that more information was required, would communicate with him for further guidance, thus enabling him to consolidate his position as a leader and formulate an active order. This is certainly true of the instruction, for example, on geomancy. The rituals and teaching were badly mauled, rearranged out of all recognition, to their former state, and then surrounded by yoga instructions, short stories, articles on sex magic, poetry, much of it of a dubious nature, and a host of miscellaneous odds and ends. With Crowley's instruction in the art of yoga, printed both within and without the equinox, there can be no quarrel. They are amongst the clearest ever produced in the subject, and amongst the finest examples of the excellent prose of which Crowley was capable. We, the occult reading public, are immeasurably the richer for their appearance. Epigrams, short stories, card games, and libels on formal friends, however, can hardly be considered fit companions for occult teachings. It is my confirmed belief that it is practically impossible, without more precise guidance or tuition, to ascertain from the equinox and Crowley's other literary productions exactly what is the actual nature of magic as a definite practical scheme, his form of presentation, and the other contexts of the equinox created nothing but confusion. Though a revelation of the inner teaching of the Golden Dawn would have been a boon to mankind, yet manifestly Crowley's manner of presentation ruined the effort. If the breaking of a sacred obligation is at all justifiable, as occasionally it is only when the matter covered by that oath is revealed in a dignified manner and with a noble spirit, as well as in style fitting to its intrinsic nature. In such an event, the oath is neither betrayed nor profane, for in being abrogated on behalf of mankind, the author becomes duly qualified to speak for those with whom alone is the power to bind or loose. It is not my wish to retract when nearly 3 years ago I enthusiastically rode in the Tree of Life. It was then my conviction, as it is now, that there was much of a highly important nature in what this extraordinary man of genius has written and published. But I am also profoundly impressed by this fact. Unless one has first studied magic from a more comprehensible and reliable source, most of what he has written, albeit based upon his own practical experience, will be in the main unintelligible. Any student who has gained a sympathetic understanding of the Golden Dawn teaching will be capable of discriminating between the futile, reprehensible portions of Crowley's work and of deciding which part of it is a worthwhile addition to an already magnificent system. And it is because Crowley concedes, to his own credit, in his, in many respects, admirable volume entitled Magic, that he has done magic inestimable service by reason of his development of it, that I have considered it imperative, together with a number of other reasons of equal urgency, to place the Golden Dawn system before the public. Crowley's claims are, in my estimation, wholly exaggerated. I am far from being convinced that the scheme of theory and practice presented in his literature, extraordinary though it is in many ways, considering that it is a development of the simple basic Golden Dawn material, is equal in any way to the system put into documentary form by S.L. McGregor Mathers and his colleagues.